Hi everyone, welcome.
Hello.
This might seem like overkill, but I like to always use a mic, make sure everybody can hear. Thanks for being here. Really important conversation, especially today, as Israel becomes a challenging topic for many of us to discuss. When I was a student, I heard a high holiday sermon actually from Sharon Brous that I've kept with me for a long time, which was that we need to stay in the conversation. It doesn't matter really what happens. We always just have to be at the table. We can't disengage. And so today's topic with Rabbi Rosove is really an important one, an essential one to me, because I'm asking this question right now. How do we stay engaged when our beloved Israel continues to do things that are so challenging to us individually, against the values we hold as Jews? And so today, we have the pleasure of diving into some of these questions about why Israel matters. Why do we have to engage? And we have the pleasure of having one of my favorite thinkers on this topic. I've been reading Rabbi Rosove for many years. When I was a student, he was heckled in the middle of a high holiday sermon, and I was like, he's my hero. On Israel, I should say. And so I'm really, really excited to have Rabbi Rosove here. He's been the past chair of ARTSA, the American Reformed Zionist, I didn't say that right. The Association of Reformed Zionists, I never can say the ARTSA thing right. ARTSA is the Association of Reformed Zionists of America, the Reform Wings Zionist and Israel branch. And he is currently one of the co-chairs of the JStreet Rabbinic Cabinet, of which I am a part of. And he's written 2 books right about this topic, almost directly to me, because they're directed to millennials and his children. Why Israel Matters and Why Judaism Matters. These books are here, and they are a perfect Hanukkah gift for all of your loved ones. They'll be available. You can even get them signed right after Rabbi Rosove's talk. So thank you for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to John.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Rabbi Kress, for inviting me. I'm here representing JStreet, but before I get into any of that, this is the first time I've been back to what was then Temple Beth Sholom since 1957. I was a religious school student here in 1957 for the 2nd grade. I was 7 years old, and my family, and I asked Rabbi Kress when I came in, do you have a list of the 14 families who founded the synagogue in 1939? Because I know that my father's cousins were among them, and he might have been one of them too. So if you can dig around and find out, I would be very grateful.
I said I bet they're hidden in the office somewhere that I haven't found.
We found the picture of the groundbreaking ceremony.
So it was 1939. And he was in Santa Monica then. He was a physician, my father, and his family, the Markowitz family, they were real pillars of the Santa Monica Jewish community in those years. And for those of you who may remember Marlboro's, do you remember Marlboro's? It was a department store in the city. Marlboro's, it was called. That was their business. Any rate, I'm here to. Curious, are any of you Israelis? How many of you have visited Israel? More than once. How many of you have lived there? Anybody speak Hebrew? A little bit. Okay, I just wanted to know to whom I'm speaking, and because I understand that there are some moderate Israelis in the congregation, I want to make sure that I knew that they were here. I'm not going to change what I'm going to say if they were aren't, but that's important. What I'd like to do is speak for about 20 minutes, and then Rabbi Kress and I will dialogue a bit and then respond to any questions that you have. I just want to acknowledge that the Novaks and I are cousins, and I know Deborah's parents fairly well, and her sister. cuz whenever it was so my cuzes. So I'm here today as a liberal American Jew and rabbi, a proud progressive Zionist, and a loving supporter of the people in the state of Israel. That just about says it, but there's more to say. As a liberal, I believe in the values of coexistence, reform, social progress, tolerance, diversity, pluralism, reasoned debate, rationalism, truth, and civility. As a Zionist, I feel strong attachment to the land, people, and state of Israel and our people's national homeland that was founded on the principles of justice and peace as articulated by the ancient prophets of Israel and as recorded in Israel's Declaration of Independence. I embrace Zionism proudly and still do, despite what's going on, and with a full heart, not only as the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, but as our people's social justice movement. Of course, Zionism today means different things to different Jews. For many, it has come to be identified with right-wing extremist and exclusive nationalism, and so given that 80% of the American Jewish community identifies with liberalism, while saying that Israel is important to our American Jewish identity, we feel conflicted and challenged by what's happening in Israel today. This is part of what I wish to discuss with you today, how we bridge our American Jewish liberalism with our perceptions of what's happening in the state of Israel. When thinking about Israel and our relationship to it, I believe that it's important for us to understand the generational differences amongst us American Jews and how we think about Israel and Zionism today. Older generations of Jews, and I obviously include myself in that group, but people older than me as well, harbor baked-in fears as a consequence of our personal experiences with anti-Semitism, our memories of and knowledge of the Holocaust, multiple Arab-Israeli wars, and terrorism. Anti-Semitism was rife when my parents were young in pre-World War II North America, and I grew up hearing these stories, thereby impacting my attitudes as a liberal American Jew. Today, however, even with the dramatic rise in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States, and Israel being the most powerful nation in the Middle East, militarily, economically, and politically, the reality of North American Jewish life is not precarious enough for younger generations of American liberal Jews to justify a state of Israel that historically served as a safe haven from anti-Semitic persecution and attack. The negative motivation from fear for young Jews to support Israel needs to give way to a more creative, nuanced, and positive justification for the importance in our Jewish lives of the Jewish state. My son's earliest memories of Israel are far different than mine. Their earliest personal memories are the Rabin assassination, the Second Intifada, and the tortured world of the Israeli television series Fauda. Have you watched it?
Yes.
So you know what I'm talking about. A gritty and violent drama, which I love the show, focusing on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from the perspective of Israel's secret services. Fauda wipes away the romantic and idealistic image of a David prevailing over a powerful Goliath, of a combined Arab world intent on Israel's destruction. The new Fauda image of Israel is why the subject of Zionism and the Jewish state is so fraught for so many young liberal and far-left American Jews today who have drawn a simple, clean, values-driven line in most situations, side by side with the oppressed, not the oppressor. Many young liberal American Jews see Israel as exclusively through the lens of the Palestinians living under a harsh Israeli occupation in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. There, injustice, inequality, and oppression raise moral and ethical challenges to Israel's foundational democratic values that are enshrined in its Declaration of Independence. Many young liberal Jews wonder whether Israel has become an oppressor. Has the Jewish state sacrificed its liberal Jewish values because of the occupation? Is that what we're asking young liberal American Jews to identify with or ignore in supporting Israel. They ask, why not boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel if it's undemocratic and oppressive as an occupational force? Why not turn away and wash our hands of the Jewish state altogether, letting Israelis fend for themselves and focus on building our own families in America while fighting for more enlightened Jewish ideals in this country and around the world? These are all hard questions. Despite the moral challenges Israel faces, especially with regards to the occupation, I hold fast to the position that it's vital for liberal American Jews to believe in Israel, to understand and see the Jewish state's promise, to accept it with its flaws while remaining impatient for justice, to support and help Israelis of like mind, and there are hundreds of thousands of them, to find its ways to being what Israel was always meant to be, and in many ways still is, an lagoyim, a light to the nations. I hold fast as well to the position that Israel needs liberal American Jews for the political support and influence we have in Washington, D.C., for our liberal values, respect for religious pluralism, for the separation of church and state, and for our experience living as a small minority in this country. All are positive experiences reflecting our liberal values that can remind Israelis why liberal democracy is necessary for the ongoing health and well-being of the Jewish community worldwide and for the state of Israel. An important thing for young liberal American Jews to remember is that in the immediate post-Holocaust period, Israel was an answer to the experience of Jewish powerlessness and despair. Today, especially for younger American liberal Jews, a more nuanced way of thinking is needed, that the Jewish state is an answer to our people who so recently experienced powerlessness and despair and do not want ever to experience that sorry state of being again. Liberal American Jews ought to appreciate as well that the Jewish people emerged from the Shoah and were reborn in a Jewish state, going from death to life, powerlessness to power, and despair to hope. In the context of Jewish history, especially since 1948, and re-emphasized after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, the state of Israel far and away is the most exciting event to occur in the last 2,000 years of Jewish history. It is a phenomenon like no other in all of Judaism. Modern Israel is a mirror of our people worldwide, embracing Jews from every nation, reflecting every ethnic and racial group, and every religious and non-religious stream. It is a place where Jewish religion, tradition, language, holidays, life cycle events, history, culture, the arts, and modernity produce a uniquely Israeli national identity that projects a vision of our people's future that is deeply Jewish, modern, humanitarian, and hopeful. I know Israel well, and taking everything together, I am amazed, despite its flaws and challenges, by what the Jewish people has built in the 142 years since our family first arrived in Palestine in 1880. That is why I eagerly invite young, alienated, liberal American Jews to look afresh at what Israel has become beyond the negative and disturbing headlines. I hope they will take into consideration how remarkable it is that millions of Jews have been successfully absorbed into and contribute to Israeli life, raise their children and grandchildren, and have renewed the Jewish people. It is stunning to realize that ancient Hebrew has been resurrected into a modern language and flows naturally through the lips of little children, and is the language of celebrated poets, songwriters, literary figures, and millions of Israeli, Jewish, and Israeli-Palestinian citizens. Despite having to fight numerous wars of survival and to protect itself against terrorism and hostility from much of the world, Israel's democracy, within the Green Line, which is the 1949 armistice line, is strong and thriving, and its Declaration of Independence is the expression of the country's highest aspirations to be a nation that values human rights for all its citizens and inhabitants. The country is evolving in ways that make me proud and optimistic for its future, despite the extremist new government that is currently forming. Only 30 years ago, there was a taboo against homosexuality in the Jewish state. Now, 150,000 people march in Tel Aviv's Gay Pride Parade each year, and there are an estimated to be 750,000 LGBTQ individuals in Israel, many coming from the Orthodox world and the Arab-Israeli community, though both communities shun homosexuality as deviant and against traditional Jewish law. The modern state of Israel accepts and welcomes them in spite of this new minister who is very homophobic. Israelis generally have become gentler and kinder people over the decades, and Israel as a nation is a more gentle and decent place. Its media image, the occupation of the Palestinians, and the need for a two states for two peoples resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict notwithstanding. There are numerous signs that the future of Israel will be better than the past. More than 15,000 active NGOs are in Israel, most not politically aligned, promote universal moral values, human rights, democracy, civil society, and the environment. Many small projects bring Arab, Muslim, Israeli citizens and Jewish Israeli citizens together to learn about one another, hear each other's stories, and to develop greater compassion. Hundreds of Arab Israeli citizens travel to Auschwitz annually to expand their understanding and help their people comprehend the depths of historic Jewish suffering that informs the Jewish people's national narrative. Many NGOs and groups, Jewish and Arab, aspire good for others. Volunteers in development towns and villages help new immigrants adjust to life in their new homes. And 150 collective communities in depressed areas seek to help impoverished children. Other programs assist Arab Israeli citizens. Mohammed Darasha, do you know Mohammed? You met him? Has been working with the Israeli government from his base at Givat Chaviva to help educate Israeli Arab women, provide child care while they work, and enable them to enter the workforce, thus lifting thousands of Israeli Arab citizens and families out of poverty. A project called Yad B'Yad, Hand in Hand, is working to create a strong, inclusive, shared society in Israel through a network of 6 Jewish-Arab integrated bilingual schools that bring together thousands of Jews and Arabs throughout Israel. Arab and Jewish students grow up together and regard each other as trusted friends, despite the differences in their histories and national narratives. And there are many Arab-Jewish ganim, preschools, in numerous cities in which little children and their parents grow up seeing the other as playmates and as family friends. Another project, Omdim B'Yachad, We Stand Together, brings thousands of Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel together with Jewish citizens of Israel across the country in a grassroots project to work together to repair the social fabric of Israel amongst all its citizens, Arab and Jewish. Schools are improving. Many Haredim, ultra-Orthodox students, are learning skills that can bring them into the workforce and out of poverty. Neighborhood bomb shelters in some places are being turned into art centers for children. Israel is among the leading nations in the world, working diligently on clean environmental technologies and innovation. 85% of Israel's drinking water comes from desalinization of seawater, among the highest percentages of any country in the world. Israelis collect food for increasing numbers of people living in poverty, and though racism and hostility between Arab and Jew exists, and too often violence between our peoples breaks out every day in the West Bank, if we visit Israeli hospitals anywhere in the country, we'll see Arabs and Jews receiving compassionate treatment on the same wards, being treated by Arab and Jewish physicians and nurses. The goodwill of Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs in many places within Israel is part of the complex, hopeful reality of the state. Yes, there are problems facing Israel domestically and internationally, and many are of its own making. There is short-sightedness and intolerance, injustice and suffering. Too many Israelis wear blinders and are oddly unaware of the injustices taking place in their name in East Jerusalem and across the Green Line in the occupied West Bank. There is far too much rage and despair and not nearly enough empathy, trust, and faith in a better and different future for both peoples. The Israeli military administration ruling over Palestinians living under occupation bulldozes homes, restricts water to Palestinian villages, stands idly by while settlers uproot Palestinian olive trees, the leading cash crop, and doesn't treat Palestinians equally to Jews living only kilometers away, contrary to Jewish ethics of treating all peoples equally in the land. Israeli parents worry that the choices their government makes have sentenced their children to a lesser future than they wish. Yet at the same time, they are thrilled to be raising their families in a country electric with creativity and alive with a sense of history, a place where kids can grow up with pride as Jews, filled with a humanitarian impulse and a desire to make their country a better place for everyone. Polls taken in recent years show that Israel ranks among the top 15 nations in the world in which its population is happy. Our own Israeli Reform and Progressive Jewish movement is growing dramatically and attracting engagement of 10% of Israel's citizens, up from 4% only a decade ago. And Reform Judaism is recognized by increasing numbers of Israeli non-Orthodox secular Jews as a Jewish cultural movement that represents their own liberal Jewish Israeli values. For the first time in Israel's history, there is a Reform rabbi, Gilad Kariv, who serves as a member of the Knesset and was part of the ruling coalition in the last government. I hope that American liberal Jews can lift their eyes from the barrage of dark news and fowler images and see that Isaiah's vision that the Jewish people be an lagoyim, a light to the nations, is manifesting itself in many ways in the state of Israel. All this needs to be understood when considering the significance of liberal and progressive Zionism and our respect for the Palestinian people's need for justice and national sovereignty in part of their homeland. It's important to understand that the cause of liberal Zionism is not only a national cause, but a universal cause. It isn't a cause that looks only inwards, it looks outward to be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. For through the liberation of the Jewish people, as Zionists, we seek the liberation of all peoples, including the Palestinians. Judaism's purpose is to represent universal moral values. At no time in Jewish history was tikkun olam, the universal demand to do what is just and right, ever ripped from the moorings of Klal Yisrael, the centrality of Jewish peoplehood. It was never one or another. Loyalty to the Jewish people, absent concern for other peoples, is a distortion of Judaism. Tikkun olam, the repair of the world, divorced from Jewish peoplehood, is not Jewish universalism, it's just universalism. I want to say a few words before closing about anti-Semitism, for it's obviously alive and well in the United States to a degree we haven't experienced in decades. Anti-Semitism has grown dramatically in the extreme political and ideological left and associates American Jews with the white racist power structure and the extreme political ideological right that is populated by neo-Nazi and violent white nationalist, supremacist, racists, and anti-Semites, though violent anti-Semitism is primarily, actually only, to be found on the far right. Modern anti-Semites include Holocaust deniers and slanderers of Israel as a Nazi-like state committing genocide against the Palestinian people. Modern anti-Semites on the left include those who falsely characterize Israel as an apartheid state, falsely because apartheid was a racial crime and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not about race. It's about land, national identity, and sovereignty. As much damage as anti-Semitism causes the Jewish people, whenever anti-Semitism takes over a cause, organization, or a country, that cause, organization, and country is destroyed from within. We need to build a firewall on the left to keep anti-Semitism out of the progressive movement, and a firewall on the right to keep anti-Semitism out of American conservatism. We have to not confuse anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of policies of the Israeli government, nor accept at face value the claims of individuals and groups that say they are not anti-Semitic, only anti-Zionist or anti-Israel. Denying the legitimacy of Zionism as the national liberation movement of the Jewish people and the right of the Jewish people to self-determination and a state of our own is anti-Semitism. Being critical of Israeli policies is not necessarily anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, or anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitic attacks are not just a Jewish problem, they're an attack on American democracy and pluralism. When one group is threatened, every group is threatened. To speak for and defend ourselves, we Jews have to know history, tradition, and thought, the ideology and growth of Zionism as our national liberation movement in all of its iterations, as well as Israeli day-to-day life and society and our people's national narrative. It's a cold heart that isn't moved by the story of the Jewish people and the creation of a Jewish state. The return of the Jews to Zion is a miracle of biblical proportions, the likes of which has not been witnessed in the history of civilization. Our people raised Zion from desolation and made it live again. More than anything else, Israel restores our capacity to believe in great things. We liberal American Jews are part of that story, that bigger story. We stand taller in America because of what our people accomplished in the Promised Land at enormous cost in blood, sweat, and tears. The Jewish people's craving for life is indomitable. In history, we were left for dead, tortured on the crosses of the Inquisition, bleeding on the steps of the Pale, incinerated in the furnaces of Europe, despised and discriminated in the lands of the Crescent, but our people survived it all and found ways to contribute to humanity, unbound and unbroken, ever determined to continue the journey. In the words of the prophets of old, I will put my breath in you, and you shall live again, and I will set you upon your own soil. I will restore my people Israel. They shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards, drink their wine, till their gardens, and eat their fruits, and I will plant them upon their own soil, nevermore to be uprooted from the soil that I have given them.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you.
Move this forward.
Shall we sit? Or
We shall.
it was
Wait, I gotta get your books in there. There we go. Perfect.
So, while all of you think about perhaps a few questions you might have, we don't have a ton of time. I'll just get us started. I could ask 100 questions. But the one, as you spoke, that came to the front of my mind, especially in the idea of remaining impatient in the pursuit of justice in Israel, is there a red line? Is there a red line that Israel as a nation state government could go over that would arrest your advocacy for the state? A few years ago, Yoav Schaefer, former IDF soldier, paratrooper, and son of our colleague Arthur Gross Schaefer, wrote a compelling article that was slightly paradigm shifting for me. And he said, I would never conflict my Jewish values for a nation state. That was essentially what he said. I can send out the article later. He said, if Israel continues on this path, if annexation is the path in which we are pursuing, and in this current government, it seems that they are putting plans in motion to do smaller chunks of annexation, which is very concerning. At some point, there's going to be a point where the state of Israel conflicts with Yoav's beliefs, and he can no longer support Israel, even as a former IDF soldier, even as a person who loves Israel. There's a point where there's a line in the sand. And I'm curious, as we start this conversation, is there a red line or something where you're particularly concerned about coming up to, even if you stay on the side of advocating for and loving Israel, that you're looking for, that you're concerned about, that would really challenge you?
Not yet. In short, I recognize what Yoav is saying. I sympathize with it. The good news is that this current government, which is a very dangerous government, I believe, still represents only 50% of Israelis. The two most extreme members, Sheltrich and Ben-Gvir, their parties represent 11% of the Israeli electorate. They've been given far too much power. Netanyahu has reserved the right to rule against them in terms of things that they're doing. However, the policies that they want to put in place in the West Bank is de facto creating annexation, even if it's not de jure. So, well, at some point, my suspicion is that the only viable alternative to a two-state solution that is separated with a border down the middle is a confederation two-state solution, which very much like the European Union, which there is a movement now that is budding to move the peoples towards that, so that none of the settlers would leave. They would be citizens of the state of Israel for national elections, but also be under the wherewithal of the state of Palestine. Jerusalem would be shared as a capital of both states. There's a lot to be worked out. Security would be under a joint security commission of some kind. There are a lot of issues that still need to be worked out, but I don't, I'm a Zionist. I believe in, as I've said, as clearly as I can in my remarks, I believe in the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. That was the first thing I learned in the late 60s when I became a really active Zionist. That was the ticket for liberal American Jews, is to identify with that element of the Zionist movement. And thankfully, the Reform movement is growing in Israel, and the modern shared society notion in the state of Israel is growing in the state. This new group, Stand With Us, Omdim Biachad, is attracting thousands and thousands of Palestinians and Israeli Jewish citizens. So there is still a lot that will happen. There is also suggested that there may be a backlash to what this government is all about, just as the election, in a way, was a backlash to the last election, to the last government, which was the most hopeful government that Israel's ever had with Abbas, the head of the Ram party, the Islamic movement party in Israel, as a member of the Knesset, and as a member of the ruling coalition. So the answer is not yet, and I don't see in my lifetime ever departing from it. It's in my familial DNA as it is for your family. I mean, our family is one family. And there's too much of me that I feel invested in the state of Israel and the land, the people of Israel, to turn away. I mean, I agree with you from your opening remarks, that quoting whomever it was that you were quoting, Sharon Brous, that we have to stay at the table from here. We can't dictate to Israelis what they're going to do, particularly in issues of war and peace. That's their decision to make. We don't send our children to the military. We don't pay Israeli taxes. All we can do is advocate in the halls of government here for a Zionism and a position of justice in the land of Israel and Palestine that will enable both peoples to live fully and well side by side.
I just want to
Omdim Biachad, just to separate the two, is a newish movement of Arabs and Israelis. Stand With Us is a relative far-right advocacy organization. So I don't know how what's the English translation? I actually think you said
Stand With Us.
No, I think that's, but Stand With Us is,
No, I know that, but
I think together, we stand together.
we stand together. We stand together, that's right. You're right.
What did he ask you? Do you know?
No, that's right. It's Ondim Biata is standing together. That's right. You're right.
Okay, so, I mean, I have 100 more questions, but I'm sure you do too. So who would like to start our Q&A? Please.
So
I'm gonna give you this just so we can.
I get the impression that more Orthodox, since they have large families, are more involved in Israel and the politics, and that's one of the reasons why Netanyahu was reelected. And if so, I know they're not in favor of a two-state solution at all. What's your feeling about this?
Well, Netanyahu's party got 1.1 million votes out of 7.5 million voters. So, in coalition, he attracted the Orthodox parties because he promised them the bank, and he's not requiring them to teach their children secular studies of math and English and history. So, they are happy to be in league with Netanyahu. He's not demanding anything of them except to vote with him. So, the truth, though, is that the Orthodox parties are growing. 6.5 children per family, whereas in the secular Israeli community, I think it's less than two children per family. So do the math. Over the course of the next 20, 30, 40 years, the population is going to be very, very Haredi. And in Jerusalem, a lot of people are fleeing from Jerusalem, going to Medinat Tel Aviv, to the state of Tel Aviv, in order to get away from the oppressive nature of the ultra-Orthodox community. So that is a challenge internally for Israel. And economically, and Netanyahu's not going to demand of them either that they have to go into the military. I mean, there are all kinds of laws that passed the Knesset which was trying to move the Haredim into being full citizens of the state, paying, so they wouldn't be on government subsidies, they would be serving in the military, and they would be contributing to society. But he has backed away from all of it because he wants their votes, because he needs to be prime minister.
Are there any other demographic concerns that keep you up at night?
Yeah, left, right. The settlers keep me up at night, and the military. There was a video that came out of about a month ago out of the West Bank, and this is happening every day, where this Israeli soldier just started beating on a Jewish peace worker, really beating him up. I mean, it was the whole thing was filmed, and what they do to the Arabs, and the Arabs, they know their needs. So that the military administration says we're fair, we investigate, we'll bring people to trial, we will, everybody will be responsible for their actions. In fact, I think it's 1 or 2% of all infractions by settlers against Palestinian people of the West Bank are even brought to trial. So the Palestinians know that they don't have a prayer in this. So that keeps me up at night. Keeps me up also because Israeli military, these young soldiers, 18, 19, 20, and 21, are serving in the West Bank and are forced to deal with the realities that they're dealing with. And it's a corruption of their Jewish hearts and souls. This keeps me up at night. That's
Yep.
what, yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm gonna give you this.
Okay.
Tell us your name also.
I'm Randy. You mentioned that the ultra-Orthodox has these privileges and they're not making, what I would say, a contribution to the military and taxes, and they get these benefits. And they're pushing this agenda, right, what you're talking about. And you said in the future, if they keep growing, that will continue. But my question is, don't you think that it'll be self-correcting? Because if the population keeps growing that way, who's going to pay the taxes? Who's going to defend the country? How can that continue?
Well, there's a lot of negative reaction to this in the general Israeli population. So hopefully you're right, that there will be a reaction against it, and take authority away from the ultra-Orthodox. There are many gradations of Orthodox in Israel. There's modern Orthodox, and even within the ultra-Orthodox communities, everybody has their own rebbes. So, they all may appear similar to those of us who don't know the distinctions in their kippot and in their dress and so forth. But there's great diversity even within the ultra-Orthodox community. And not all are as hostile to the modern state as some of them are. So there's, if historical necessity creates a new reality that is more in the best interest of a modern Jewish state, democratic state, Dayenu. But we've learned the hard way in this country that great damage can be done over a very short period of time to the democratic fabric of society.
Absolutely.
I'm Al. So you made the distinction that we shouldn't use the term apartheid to describe, the system in the occupied territories. And you said that was because apartheid is a racial thing. Don't you think that's just a semantic difference? I mean, should we be disturbed by the completely different treatment of the Arabs versus the Israelis in the occupied territories, just as much as if it were racial?
Well, the word apartheid, to me, is triggering, and it's an evil. That's not to say that the occupation isn't evil, but if you look at the occupation as a conflict of nationalities and rights to land, those two things, if you see that, then there's room for accommodation and compromise with the two peoples, because each claims that the land belongs to them. The problem, and even within the Israeli society, Yossi Klein Halevi, are you familiar with him? Yossi was speaking at the JStreet conference last week to the rabbinic cabinet, rabbinic cantorial cabinet, and he made the distinction, which was a nuanced, very interesting distinction, that from his perspective as an Israeli, Hakol Shali, all the land between the river and the sea is mine, but I will give up some of the land, as opposed to saying it belongs to both of us and you will take the land from us, which disturbed me. I don't see it that way. I see that the land belongs to both peoples, and that both peoples have a legitimate claim to the same land. So what you have to do is divide it somehow. And that's why this new avenue towards confederation is exciting and is attracting attention. When Israelis and Palestinians are polled about that as an option, although it's not a big movement at this point, 30% say that yes, that is something that I could support. Now, and this is a new movement, the idea of confederation. So it's still two states, but it's where no one would have to leave their homes. They would identify, they would live in either Palestine or in Israel. They could choose to vote in the national elections of one or the other, but be under the hegemony of the state of Palestine or the state of Israel and abide by its laws. And there would have to be mutual security and shared water and shared everything that's necessary for two peoples to move forward. And that, I think, is the inevitable resolution of this conflict. And it may not be in my lifetime, I don't know. But I don't, by not using the word apartheid, to get to your original point, it doesn't mean that I don't think that the occupation is an evil. I do. But it's of a different kind. And though people I respect call it apartheid, I just don't see it that way, and I think it's a problematic term. Because it isn't. If you look at what apartheid used to do to African families in South Africa, it is not what is being done to the Palestinians in the West Bank. in Gaza.
Thank you.
Some of it is, but not point blank.
We see a change in how the American Jews are reacting. I mean, historically, AIPAC has been the solid gold supporter of Israel, and now in the last election, it's more important that you elect a candidate who get money from different causes, and AIPAC become more, I would say, more conservative in that regard, and we see how this affects in the future when you have leaders saying, Jews, I only wish the Jews would be more for Israel as the Episcopalians are. And in that regard, we're bringing the whole idea of support for Israel is almost becoming more of a party issue. Do you see that as a danger in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big problem. It's been going on for about 20 years. It's been moving in that direction. Just when, and I'm forgetting his name, he was a Republican Jewish congressman from Virginia who was defeated by surprise. He was the head of, he was on his way to become a speaker. Do you all know who I'm thinking of?
Yeah, but I can't think of his name anymore.
Anyway, he was the first to make Israel a partisan issue in Congress. I remember I was having lunch with Henry Waxman in the House offices, a good friend of yours for many years. And I said, what is so-and-so doing? He said, when the Democrats were in the majority in the 2000s, the first time before they lost it, 2010 I guess it was, Henry was one of the most powerful men in Congress, and he could go to this guy and say, would you please stop doing what you're doing? He and Howard Burnham both. They would go to him and say, you've got to stop making Israel a partisan issue. And so he stepped back. But then when the Republicans took control of Congress, he continued the divisiveness. And then during the Iran crisis, the Iran deal thing, and Bibi played right into it, because Bibi made a calculation that the evangelical community and the right wing and Republicans were more important to him and Israel than the liberal American Jewish community. And he now has he's got to deal with that now. And I don't know whether he will successfully or not. I know the liberal American Jewish community doesn't trust Bibi, and he still has his predilections, but we'll see what happens. As Anthony Blinken said at our conference last week, he said, we're not looking at personalities, we're looking at actions. Depending upon what the state of Israel does is what's important, not on who it puts in positions of control and power. So I think that was a smart threading the needle, but these people that are gaining power in the government, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and a bunch of others, they are a danger to Israel's democracy, to any kind of future two-state solution, whether it's confederation or otherwise. And we need to watch very, very carefully. How are we doing?
We're doing all right. I think I'm going to ask our last question, just to keep us relatively on time, which is taking a slight turn from where we are right now, to perhaps jump off of your comments about anti-Semitism. I think, from my perspective, I was a campus rabbi for a few years, and I'm not so far removed from college.
He's not so far removed from college.
But, one of the things you said at the beginning of your talk was learning about the Israel that's not just in the headlines. And it stood out to me because I think one of the things most people who aren't on college campuses all they know about it are the headlines. And when anti-Semitism becomes a bludgeon for Israel criticism, as you mentioned, but also Jewish folks who are not Zionist, we can call them whatever we want, but don't support a nation of Jews. And I particularly mean Jewish folks who feel that way, not Jewish folks. Not that I was saying that about myself, I just did this with my arm. So I think that this is a big topic right now. How anti-Semitism, as we've seen spikes in violent crime against Jews, it's being used also as a political Israel tool. And how we navigate that as a liberal Jewish community that supports Israel, supports the criticism of Israeli policies we don't agree with, that sends our young people to college and wants to have them well prepared. How do we navigate this, this threading of the needle of this issue as anti-Semitism seemingly just continues to be more present in our lives?
That's a really important question. First of all, the number of, I think it's about 80% of the American Jewish community considers Israel very important or important to their Jewish identity. 80%. Of that 20% that don't, a lot of them are these young people you're talking about, but others as well. So the rate of this alienation from Israel among really full alienation from Israel of young Jews is not as big as people fear. That said, it's really important that rabbis, cantors, educators, parents, grandparents, and community leaders really work in synagogue settings in particular, in Jewish organizational life, and in summer camps and everywhere else, to teach Israel in the most exciting way, and Zionism in the most exciting way that is possible, and get as many of our people to Israel as possible on tours. And a lot of people I found, I took tours to Israel every 3 years for my congregation of adults, and then my colleague would take family trips. My goal when I took people to Israel was to confuse them and to inspire them that Israel was a dynamic, complicated, exciting, amazing place. And so we met people from dawn to late at night. And I remember after the fourth day of one of these trips, the group just had a headache. And they wanted to have a meeting in the hotel just to debrief. So I arranged for a room, we sat around a circle, and I said, okay, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? And everybody went around until the smartest one in the group, who was on our board also, and I always used to say to him, Bert, he's a brilliant lawyer. I said, I wish you'd speak first, because then we could go home early. Because he always summed up, he synthesized everything, and when it got to him, he finally said, you know what? Everybody's right. That's what he said. Everybody's right. And that's the rub in Israel. But that's what's so exciting about it. And I was telling the rabbi this last week, I spoke on behalf of JStreet to an Israeli group called Gesher. And I actually have some handouts in addition to whatever books you want to buy. That I posted a blog on the Times of Israel after I met with this group of 20 Israelis. And these Israelis were from every walk of life in Israel of all ages. They were here to meet American Jews and to create a bridge. Gesher needs a bridge. And the questions they asked, there were broadcast journalists, there were written journalists, there were military, there were Haredim, they were Sephardim, Mizrahim, Ashkenazim, secular, the whole gamut. The questions they asked were really on point, and their diversity is what they're finding in the American Jewish community's diversity. The difference between them and us, and the middle class, secular Israeli, and us here, you were kind of alluding to it earlier. In Israel, everybody speaks Hebrew. They walk on the same land that the prophets walked. They study history in the secular schools. They live according to a Jewish calendar. There are life cycle events happening everywhere. There's the music, the Hebrew music is as good as it's ever been, and better, in fact. And Israeliness, which is different than just Jewish, it's Israeliness, is infused in the rhythms of Israeli life and society. Here, you have to really work to be engaged. You know, we're 2% of America, 0.2% of the world population. I think I'm right on that. You really have to make an effort to engage and be part of a Jewish community and Jewish life. So that difference between Israelis and American Jews is really dramatic. And we won't understand them unless we go there and see what they're living. And they won't understand us. You suggested that there be a birthright for Israelis coming to America. And that's what the Gesher group is, kind of a birthright trip. So that they can get a feel for who we are and why we're 80% liberal Democrats, where they love Trump. They do. They love Trump because he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and he disbanded the Iran-Contra deal, and they think that he's the best thing that ever happened to Israel, which is just mind-blowing. You know, I can say this, your rabbi can't say this, you know, but...
Or a best shalom. So we'll just conclude with a thank you. I'm so grateful that you were here. This conversation is always ongoing. Just to conclude, a concluding thought is this idea of bringing people into the nuance, into the confusion, into the gray area instead of the black and white. We're going on this trip to the South this year in April for that exact purpose, to bring you to all my favorite Republicans in New Iberia, Louisiana, where my student pulpit was. And then hopefully we will be leading a trip to Israel. My goal is next year, and to spend a year of our community digging into the histories of Zionism in its many factions that many of us have never studied, and then going and learning and confusing you. So look out for that, but I'm grateful to have this confusing conversation with no clear answers, but engaged in the conversation. And I think for those of you that haven't been involved in JStreet yet, I encourage you to sign up, to get the emails. They have a lot of great programming in our area. They have amazing speakers like Rabbi Rosove here. And in general, it's the most obvious way, I think, to remain connected in this struggle for the Israel of Israel's Declaration of Independence that can be an lagoyim, but sometimes struggles too.
Can I make one more suggestion? I have some handouts of things
Oh.
for Israel engagement, which we'll give to you only without that.
Buy his book.
That too. But does your synagogue have a relationship with the Sister Reform Synagogue in Israel?
I want to say no.
Well, that's something you can do. And then when you go to Israel, you can visit them. And their rabbis come here. And that kind of personal bond, because